All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for what I'm sure will be a thrilling debate. We've got two exceptional panelists here to tell you about whether tech companies pay enough tax. Now, as the moderator, I'm not going to bore you with my opinion because you want to hear from these two over here. But before we begin, so that's the motion, do tech companies pay enough tax? I want to see a show of hands. How many of you believe that tech companies currently pay enough taxes? Not a whole lot. Interesting, at a tech conference, there's a lot of you who don't seem to think that you pay enough taxes. Okay, so how many of you then believe that tech companies should be paying more taxes? All right, that seems like, it's hard to say, a 70-30 split, maybe?
I feel like Hillary Clinton, it is my night to lose.
So we're going to actually have opening statements for up to 5 minutes each, and then we'll come back with some Q&A, some debate, and then I'll revisit this motion with you and see if these two over here have swayed your opinion. And here to argue that tech companies currently do not pay enough tax is Andra. So Andra, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Sabrina. In this world, nothing is said to be certain but death and taxes. Benjamin Franklin, 1789. And the history of tax has gone back as far as recorded history. 3,000 years ago, we have records of Chinese emperors collecting tax. And the history of tax avoidance goes back almost as far. The Egyptian pharaohs directed their scribes to check that households didn't recycle their cooking oil in order to avoid the tax. And the United States of America was founded on a reluctance to pay tax, at least to the British, because it wasn't many years before the nascent government of the United States of America reintroduced both direct and indirect taxation. So we've had this battle for a long time, but it seems clear to me that if citizens want services to be provided fairly and equally, that we must have taxation. The opposite policy, that of a free market economy without centralized or command levies, has never been implemented fully, successfully. Today's nation-states are all practitioners of a hybrid form of free market economy and command regulations. So, according to the 2017 Index of Economic Freedom, Hong Kong is the closest to a free market economy, with a score of 89.8%, followed by Singapore on 88.8. Interestingly, both are very small countries, and their spending on infrastructure and military is also small. Now, strangely enough, Australia and New Zealand both rank very highly in the top 5 of the Economic Freedom Index. Australia's on 81% and New Zealand's on 83.7%, with Switzerland on 81.5%, ahead of the United States, which is on 75.1%. Now, as an Australian who was born in New Zealand, who is still a citizen of both countries, I can tell you, we certainly have taxes. We pay taxes, and we have also a great education and health system, at least in comparison to the United States. But I guess we don't have a lot of military spending. So it would seem that a comparatively low level of taxation is sufficient to maintain a healthy social infrastructure. But it's also clear, particularly with the recent reporting of the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers, that many people are not paying their fair share. Just today, the Institute for Policy Studies announced that the 3 richest people in the US, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and Warren Buffett, have as much wealth as the poorest half of the US population. Their combined wealth of around $250 billion US shows the increasing divide between rich and poor. And 80% of the recently proposed US tax cuts would go to benefit the wealthiest 1%, while 1 in 5 US households live underwater with negative wealth. According to Oxfam, the 8 wealthiest individuals in the world have a combined wealth equivalent to the wealth of half of the world's population. That's 8 people on that side, and that's 3.8 billion people on that side. I don't think those scales balance. Now, to fix this, we don't need to increase taxes. We simply need to eliminate tax avoidance. Globalization is allowing the wealthy to pick and choose which jurisdictions and tax rates they want. And this freedom of choice is being exercised specifically to minimize taxation. You can't blame small countries, like Ireland, for offering sweetheart deals to attract wealth, tech wealth in particular, into their economies. But have any of them received the rewards they hoped for? All accounts show a decline in the quality of life of every single tax haven. The financial gains go back overseas. The local government becomes co-opted and stops providing services for the local population. Even Luxembourg suffered this, let alone Panama or the Cook Islands. And yet a conservative accounting says that more than 10% of the world's GDP, and we know it's conservative because so much wealth is still hidden, this is in offshore tax havens, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research. Now try telling the people of the British Virgin Islands that they're wealthy. Hurricanes Irma and Maria have completely devastated the island, taking out the power, communication, sanitation, and most of the buildings. Who's going to take responsibility for rebuilding, aside from Richard Branson, who said that the damage is so vast, global intervention is required? But the issue of tax avoidance is not only about wealthy individuals. Individuals benefit by the legal structure we've created for corporations. Now, once upon a time, corporations were the vehicle by which innovation happened. Individuals would be penalized for taking entrepreneurial risks without the protection of corporate structure. So we gave companies all the benefits of legal personhood, but there's no balancing incentive to maintain the standard of society. It's the tragedy of the commons, and even if some companies wish to be socially just, the corporate structure legally prioritizes short-term thinking and rewards only the shareholders, not society at large. So tech companies are no better than other companies. Arguably, they are even worse because they have grown so rapidly recently. Inequality is also growing at an increasingly rapid rate, and I think there's a connection. The worldwide average corporate tax rate has declined since 2003 from 30% to 22.5%. And that is every region of the world has seen this decline in the last 13 years. So if there's anything that we can learn from the recent history of Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Microsoft, it's clear that once a company reaches a certain size, it ceases to be innovative, and instead it starts to engage in cartel behavior, in competition fixing, labor extorting, and tax evading instead of innovation. In conclusion, we must all pay tax if we want a socially just world with healthcare, aged care, and education for all. The question isn't about raising taxes, simply eliminating tax avoidance. Tax should be paid by companies, not just individuals, as companies own or earn the most money, and tech companies are no different to any other company. Taxing tech companies will not have an impact on innovation, particularly not compared to other issues that affect innovation. Tech is not neutral. Tech companies both help the world and right now make the world a worse place. So the least they can do is help pay to clean up the mess.
Thank you, Andra. Thank you so much. So you gave a lot of food for thought, and I'm sure we will return to some of those points. But Rolf is going to make an opening statement now about why tech companies currently do pay enough tax.
Yeah, first of all, I think it's funny, how you end up on a stage like this, in a debate like this at the end, just because on the wrong online form you just filled out like, you haven't read the question right, was the first thing, and then you might have like a cross somewhere, and then you see yourself standing here. But at the end, I just want to give you maybe a bit more background, if I would have read the question right, how I would have thought about it. So do tech companies pay enough taxes? And I think I think first of all, I think the first struggle that I would have is tech companies. So why do we speak about tech companies? And I think there you're perfectly right when you said tech companies are not better or worse. Or first of all, what is a tech company? You know, what is a tech company? I mean, there's technology for the last millions of years of existence. There's technology, right? So since we created the first X, there's a technology, and when we created the printing press, there was technology, and when we created the computer, there was technology. So where does technology start and where does technology end? And I think then when you speak about taxation of tech companies, then I think we are in a big dilemma, right? Because we would first of all have to define what is a tech company. So for me, a tech company is like anyone else. And then the second question is, and I think that is also what you were speaking about, and I think we can vastly agree, do companies pay enough taxes? And that's coming in when I tell you how I misread this question. Because, you know, do tech companies have to pay enough taxes? And I think that is a big difference. And I think there is also, I think for me, it's always before we speak about, like, do we want to raise taxes? I think we first should speak about, you know, are the taxes paid, right? And I think there is something where we can absolutely agree on. Because I think before we speak about new taxes, let's speak about are taxes really paid? And when we look at Paradise Papers or whatsoever in the latest days, I think we see that they're not paid. And that's inequality. Because that is hurting all the startups which are sitting here, startups like us, who are always paying their taxes in Germany with a corporate tax rate and so on, and it's hurting innovation. If there are loopholes for large companies, and if it's at the end not a law if you pay taxes or not, but if it's the end a decision, a moral decision. And then at the end, you know, you're always worse off if you take a moral decision. And I also don't want to live in a world like this, where people who take moral decisions are worse off. So that's why I say, let's first of all close the loopholes. Let's close the loopholes. And then we see, you know, how much taxes are paid, really paid. You know, and then we have equality. And then we can still discuss, is that enough? Should there more taxes be paid from those corporations? Should there more taxes be paid from the capitalists who own these corporations? That's something we can debate. And I totally agree that when we're looking in the future, we will have to think about how we distribute the wealth among a broader population. Yeah? So I'm totally agree to things like basic income, yeah? Which I think is a great concept. Yeah? Though where we do not agree is that the world is worse off because of tech companies. So there I have to make clearly a stand. Yeah? So we might agree on are the rich people too rich? We might agree on that. Is the world a worse place because of tech companies? No, because it's became a better place because of tech companies over the last thousands of years. It was always tech companies who were driving innovation. And I think in the moment where you start taxing innovation, in the moment where you start taxing productivity, in that moment you have really a problem. Because then we're going backwards. And I think then there's way less wealth that we can distribute among people. Yeah? So, yeah.
Well, so it sounds like where you have some disagreement is on the impact on innovation. So I want to bring about this point, because when you talk to a lot of tech companies, and this is of course a cross-industry issue, they say that, you know, new taxes as well as any kind of new regulation is burdensome and stifles innovation. And this seems to be a point of disagreement between the two of you.
Our point of disagreement is really around the wording, because on the one hand, I believe that there are other things that cause tech companies problems, and that relates more to the difficulty hiring, immigration problems, brain drain. Those issues are great problems for tech companies. The problem that I have is the combining of innovation with the words tech companies. And it's not the tech that's the problem, it's the companies that's the problem. And I was fascinated to learn that the company structure was what allowed entrepreneurship to flourish. But I think it's broken right now. And I think that if we have innovation, it's because entrepreneurs are flourishing in spite of companies. And I think that there's a really, really big difference between a startup and the sort of company that can afford the lawyers to go and bury its money offshore.
Do you want to jump in?
No, I totally agree. I totally agree. And I think that is inequality. I think inequality is if there's large companies who can pay the lawyers, who can bring their money offshore, and so on, and they are competing with small companies who cannot do that. And I think that is, of course, hurting innovation. But the problem is rather the size and the market power. Yeah, that is a problem. And there I can also totally understand when people get afraid of like companies of that size, because companies of that size never existed before. That's a new thing, actually, right? And so we should be super afraid of innovation monopolies in the future. Yeah, I think that is something we should be super afraid of, because that is something that is at the end hurting innovation in the long run.
So how do you make this distinction then between startups and these bigger companies? How would you like policymakers to approach, for example, the difference between a startup having to pay new taxes or be subject to new taxes, as opposed to those larger companies who, as you said, have the lawyers to be able to afford?
No. I don't think you don't have to. You don't have a definition problem, because you could basically. It's not about let's define who's small, who has to pay less taxes, and who's large and pays more. Let's just have the same rules apply for everyone. Yeah. I mean, right now that's not the case. That's not the case because governments do exceptions for large companies. The larger a company gets, the more exceptions they are. Just cut down on the exceptions. Don't have exceptions. Let's tax everyone the same. And I think why a lot of young companies also don't have like a huge problem with high corporate taxes is because they reinvest a lot of their money and they don't earn a lot of money, right? And that's why they are generally like having not a problem with that. And the moment where they're getting larger, and then they're having the possibilities to get the money out of the country, that is a problem.
And the other thing is the short-term thinking that's become baked in. It's baked into company structure, where you're responsible to your shareholders on quarterly income reporting, and where investors have a 5-year period to return a fund. I work in the robotics industry, and I can tell you that the majority of the most innovative technologies have come from research and development groups that have had substantially more than 5 years funding and development time, and often from small entrepreneurs who have leveraged some of those technologies and skills that they've gained. But I think that to grow innovation, we need to have longer-term thinking and not short-term thinking.
Now, these debates go by rapidly, as you can tell, because we already would have to now make some closing statements. I'm going to ask each of you to make a very brief, maybe 1 minute, please, if you can, closing argument, and then we can see how the crowd feels.
You go.
Sure, I should start. No, I generally think that first of all we have to make sure that everybody has the same basis, that everybody pays the same taxes, and then we can see, then we can look at the distribution, and then we can see, do we have to redistribute the money, and how do we do that, right? And I think that is a different question. Yeah? But first of all, let's do the things, let's use the methods that we have right, and then we can think about new taxes.
Thank you. Andra?
Okay, and I sympathize with Rolf. I also thought that I was on the other side of this question until I got here. But I did at least write my notes down. And it occurred to me, as I looked at this question, that it really, for me, was absolutely not about tech or companies or even tax. We've got into this mess through globalization and greed. And we're at a really unique moment in history. We can communicate around the world. Our ships and planes cross the world. People have an unprecedented ability to travel. And we can trade globally. Our business corporations are no longer bound by national boundaries. These are human creations, though, and corporations can be changed. We also have weapons capable of destroying our planet. And yet we don't have the ability to leave our planet yet. So I think it's time we focused our efforts on a global system of governance, of tax, and of human rights. We have technologies that can help us with that. Ubiquitous connectivity, the computing power to do microtransactions, and the blockchain to secure them. Maybe technology can help fix the mess that rapid globalization and greed have gotten us into.
Thank you so much. Sounds like a new global governance might be what the doctor ordered. Andra and Rolf, I want to thank both of you, and I want to quickly revisit with the crowd if any opinions have been changed. Let's see another show of hands. Do you believe, yes, tech companies currently pay enough tax? Okay, I feel like I see a few more hands than before. And let me see a show of hands for those who believe that tech companies do not pay enough taxes.
We all agree.
We all agree.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, sometimes it's more of a discussion than a debate, but I want to thank all of you for joining us. And again, thank you to both Rolf and Andra. I'm Sabrina Siddiqui. Take care.
Thanks.